right, welcome back. This is Gabriel Arruda with ReverseAutoimmune.com, and we're going to be talking about secrets in your genes that are keeping you from healing. So as we get started here, I would like to tell you about Sally. So Sally is a lady in her mid to late 40s, and Sally has been getting more and more sick over the last 15 years. Sally suffers with chronic fatigue. She suffers with bad food allergies. She gets sick really easy. She deals with depression. Sally has a hard time feeling positive, and she also struggles with bouts of anxiety. Sally's been diagnosed with a few different autoimmune diseases by a few different doctors, and fortunately the doctors can't really seem to agree on what her problem is. And the meds that they've been giving her only seem to make her situation worse. Well, Sally has started seeing a natural doctor, and Sally is an ideal patient. You know, she went vegan for several years. She's done juice fasting, and she's changed a lot of things in her life. She has changed her different products that she uses, and she's avoiding a lot of the chemicals and toxins that are in society. And some of the things that Sally has done have helped. However, Sally is still sick. Sound like someone you know? Maybe it sounds like you. But the question is, what's going on? Why can't Sally get better? Now, I'm not going to pretend to have all the answers here today. However, I do know that there are many situations in which issues at a genetic level are sabotaging all attempts to get well. And so it's quite possible that secrets in your genes can be preventing you from achieving healing. Now, in 1990, there was a project that was launched called the Human Genome Project. And the goal of this project was to sequence and to map the entire DNA sequence, the entire strand of the human DNA. It finished in 2003, and it's opened up some really interesting opportunities and some really interesting discoveries. One of these discoveries is that there are many regularly occurring gene mutations that are happening in society, very common ones. And these gene mutations can directly relate to whether or not you get an autoimmune disease. And these genetic mutations also affect how you would go about treating your autoimmune disease if you have the genetic issue. Now, these mutations are involved in a large number of people who suffer with neuroimmune syndromes. For instance, ADHD, ADD, OCD, even autism, fibromyalgia, multiple sclerosis, and many other different kinds of autoimmune-related diseases. And scientists and medical professionals everywhere seem to agree on one thing about autoimmune diseases, and that is that there are genetic elements tied to it. The people who get it are genetically predisposed to getting them. And I found this to be true. If you look at certain ethnicities get hit with particular autoimmune diseases worse than others. And some families get hit really heavy with autoimmune diseases, while other families have no instances of autoimmunity. My family, for instance, there are 6 people in my family who have been affected with autoimmune diseases and have it in their history. So what exactly is a genetic mutation? So a genetic mutation is a variation in a certain molecule that occurs at a specific position on our genetic instructions, which is the DNA. And down the line, this genetic issue has the potential to abnormally change some function in the body. It could be quite severe, as a matter of fact. Now, I divide these genetic issues into 2 different categories. First, there are genetic mutations that cause a loss in the immune system's capability to discern between self and foreign invaders. The loss of ability to distinguish between this is my body versus this is a foreign pathogen. The loss of the ability to do that. The second category of gene mutations are called a SNP. SNP. That's an acronym that stands for single nucleotide polymorphisms. And what these are, these SNPs, they either speed up or slow down some chemical process in your body. And we're going to discuss more of the second category. We're going to talk exclusively about these since there's more research on these and we know how to better deal with them. So what exactly do SNPs do? Well, as I previously mentioned, they can either slow down or speed up some chemical process in the body. Let me give you an example. There are certain enzymes that are responsible in your body for making available certain vitamins and minerals. And if that enzyme is slowed down or if it's sped up, you could have too little or too much of those vitamins and minerals that the enzyme was responsible for making available. Too much or too little. And due to these gene mutations, it's also possible that certain good chemicals might get converted over to things that are toxic if they hang around in the body too long. And these gene mutations, they also directly impact our neurotransmitters, things like dopamine, adrenaline, serotonin, for instance. And these gene mutations can affect our enzymes that are responsible for moving these neurotransmitters to where they need to be, breaking them down when the body's done with them, or converting them into things that we need. And if these processes are slowed down or sped up, some bad things can take place. It can make you quite toxic, which could lead to causing you to have a hard time sleeping, insomnia. It can make it hard for you to calm down after a stress event. We're talking days, weeks after a stress event. It can make it hard for you to feel good, just to have that sense of well-being. It can make it hard for you to think. It can make you lack energy, and it can even enhance your ability to feel pain. Any takers? That sound good? Now, these are all horrible things, and so these gene mutations can tremendously impact our quality of life. And out of all the gene mutations, I'd say the one that's getting the most attention right now has got to be the MTHFR gene mutation. MTHFR, it's an acronym that stands for methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase. The MTHFR gene is responsible for lots of things, tons of things. Now a gene, remember, genes are simply sets of instructions. Genes are sets of instructions. And the MTHFR gene has the instructions for making the MTHFR enzyme. Now enzymes in your body are like the workers. If you could imagine the minerals and vitamins that we eat, those are like the building blocks of a house. That's the wood, the bricks, the mortar. The enzymes are like the workers. They're like the carpenters and the laborers that actually do the building with the materials, the raw materials. The MTHFR enzyme facilitates an action in the body called methylation. Now what methylation is? It's the attaching of a methyl group, which is one carbon and 3 hydrogen molecules, to another chemical compound in the body. When a methyl group is attached to a chemical compound, another chemical compound in the body, it changes the shape and thus changes the function of that chemical compound, and it starts doing a different job. And so the reason why this is important is because methylation is responsible, that process that we just talked about, that attaching of a methyl group, is responsible for about 200 crucial biochemical processes in the body. So this is really, really important. Methylation is an absolutely critical part of our biochemistry. And if it's not happening, or not happening enough rather, some pretty bad things can take place. Well, let's look into that. What can happen? Rather, what does methylation do? And let me give you some examples of the wonderful things that methylation does, and thus what can go wrong if it's not happening. So number one, methylation actually turns on and off genes. That's right, your genes can be switched on and off. And methyl groups are like on and off switches to the genes. And they can turn things off like cancer genes. Also, they can turn off stress responses. And so in short, without methylation, you will have a very difficult time beating cancer and being able to calm down after a stressful situation. You need those methyl groups to do that. And if you're not methylating at a proper level, you're not going to have a lot of those methyl groups to do this. Also, methylation reduces aging. So aging is equivalent to DNA damage. Think about aging that way. And methyl groups help keep DNA together. And so when we don't have enough methyl groups, we can't keep the DNA together, and that essentially adds up to rapid aging. Any takers for rapid aging? No? Well, you want methyl groups then. And so please pay attention to what we're talking about here. Not just that, methylation also supports the production of a very important antioxidant called glutathione. Now, glutathione is the body's main detoxing agent. Not having enough methyl groups means not having enough glutathione, which means you're detoxing. Your body's ability to detox is going to be down. So this could mean that you're doing all kinds of wonderful things to detox, and you're just getting a fraction of the benefits of all those attempts that you're making, because you've got an issue going on at a genetic level that's not making these methyl groups available. Also, methylation helps provide us with energy. You see, the methylation cycle goes right into another cycle called the Krebs cycle. And the Krebs cycle is directly responsible to generating energy. Energy for our body to do all the wonderful things that we like to do. And so, therefore, having the MTHFR gene mutation can lead to having less energy. So, super important. Lastly, the last thing I'm going to talk about, there's many things that it does, but this is the last point. Methylation activates and regulates the immune system. And this is a big reason why those who have the MTHFR gene mutation are so commonly associated with having an autoimmune disease. It's why there's a great connection between these two. It's because that enzyme, the gene and the enzyme, are responsible for regulating the immune system, and an autoimmune disease is a dysregulated immune system. So there's a real connection there. So many other things that take place that we're not going to get into, but you can see how if you have this gene mutation, and thus you don't have enough methyl groups to do these wonderful things that we just found out about, that you could be in a world of hurt. Some really bad things could be taking place. However, there's good news in all of this. The good news is there's something called epigenetics. Epi means above. So epigenetics simply means above the genes. There are things that kind of trump the genes, if you can want to put it that way. And this simply means you can control to a certain degree, you can control through lifestyle how your genes express. Genes can be turned on, genes can be turned off. And that means you can keep bad genetic issues from expressing. That's good news. And one health professional put it this way. He said, genes therefore are our tendency, not our destiny. I like that. That's good news. Okay, so how slowed down will this methylation process be if you have the gene mutation? Well, it depends. This gene mutation can come down to you, can be passed down either through your father, your mother, or both. And depending on whether you get it from one parent or both parents, depends how severely the gene is going to be slowed down in your body. How slowed down, rather, the gene is going to tell the enzyme to be. If you have it from both parents, it's going to be worse than if you have it from just one. Also, it depends on which point on the MTHFR gene the mutation occurs. And there are 2 points on the MTHFR gene that are the problematic ones. Depending on which one of these you have, that also determines how slowed down the gene it will be for you. And the C677T is typically worse to have than the A1298C. And so depending on these factors, it can vary how slowed down it is. Typically the range is 30% slowed down up to 70% slowed down. And 70% slowed down is the worst that I'm aware of, and it can be quite severe. But I say praise the Lord. Why? Because thank God it's not 100%, because do you know what would happen if it was 100% slowed down? You would die. You could cease to sustain life with all the things that methylation is needed for in the body. And so let's talk about who has it. Who has this gene mutation? It's estimated that 40% of Americans have some variation of this gene mutation. So we're talking millions, tens of millions of people. And it's not just Americans that have this. This is an international problem. You find it more common in Italians as well, Hispanic cultures, and Northern Chinese cultures as well. People of Northern Chinese descent. And every person that my wife and I personally know that have an autoimmune disease that gets tested for this gene mutation comes up positive. Every person. And I have it. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But because there's such a strong link between this gene mutation and people who have autoimmune diseases, I think every person who has an autoimmune disease should get tested for this gene mutation. And if you don't get tested, if you don't want to spend the $200 to do that, at least start looking into or pursuing the protocol, which I'll talk about here in a minute. Now, something else that I need to talk about with this MTHFR gene mutation is folate. Folate, which is the vitamin B9, is a super key vitamin in the body. One health professional said virtually just about anything good that happens in your body involves folate. It's a little bit of an exaggeration, but you get what I'm saying. It's very important for the body. It's necessary for immune system function, it's necessary for nervous system function, and DNA health. All those things are crucial, super crucial to the body. And another thing that methylation is responsible for is making the usable form of folate. Not just that list of things we discussed, it's also necessary for making folate usable to the body. Now you might be thinking, what do you mean making it usable to the body? Don't I make it usable when I eat it? Actually, no, you don't. It's just the very beginning of it. When we eat folate in our diet, dietary folate, after it gets broken down and transported into the body, it has to go through the folate cycle. It has to go through 7 biochemical stages of changes that are made before it comes out on the other end as the usable form of folate. That's 5-MTHF, and that's the biochemical form, the label given to it. And that last stage of that folate cycle requires the MTHFR enzyme. And so if the enzyme slowed down, you're going to have a reduced output of the usable form of folate in your body. And so that's what this essentially boils down to is all that dietary folate that you're eating, you're only going to be getting a fraction or a percentage of the benefits of that, depending on how slowed down your gene is. So you could be eating all these great leafy greens and all these great sources of folate, but you're only getting possibly as little as 30% of the benefits of that folate. You could be getting as much as 70%, depending on what end of the scale of the gene mutation you're on, how severely you have it. So this is really important. I mean, you could be doing a lot of things to induce this healing in your body and yet not realizing the benefits because you have issues at a genetic level that aren't being addressed. And it's been found that people who have the MTHFR gene mutation tend to get sickest and tend to get sickest the longest, unless you know how to treat it. So we're going to discuss that here in a second. But where do you get dietary folate? Because if you have this gene mutation, you need to be taking in as much dietary folate as possible. So you could get it from leafy greens. The word folate, it sounds like the word foliage, right? That's partly where the word is derived from. And so leafy greens, that's where we get it from. Also, legumes, lentils are really high in folate. And in our ebook, we have a whole list of high folate-rich foods. You can find them online as well. But if you're getting a good, diverse plant-based diet, you're going to get a pretty good amount of folate. And so you want to make sure and max that gene out, no matter up to what capacity it's functioning at. You want to max that out. So what do you do about the rest? Let's talk about that. How do you treat the MTHFR enzyme, the MTHFR mutation, rather? So what needs to happen is you need to make sure you're getting adequate amounts of the vitamins that this gene mutation makes you low in, namely vitamins B6, B9, which is folate, B12, and D3. D3 is something to include that helps with transport of these. Now, don't run out and get folic acid. Don't get folic acid. Folic acid has been found to actually slow down the pathway. Remember that 7-stage pathway we talked about, the folate pathway? It's been found to slow down the folate pathway even more. So if you take folic acid and you have this mutation, you're doubly slowed down now. And so don't go get folic acid. I know it's bizarre, and by the way, folic acid is in lots of stuff. You really have to read your labels. By law, all wheat has to be fortified with folic acid. So just keep that in mind. So you want a plant-based diet, you want to be getting dark leafy greens, you also want to be getting good sunlight exposure, about 30 minutes a day, and that's going to max out the capacity of your inhibited MTHFR enzyme. But on top of that, what do we do about the rest? The part that we can't, the amount that we can't get because of our inhibited enzyme. And this is where supplementation comes in. Now, I'm really not a big promoter of supplements. I find that people tend to supplement instead of making simple lifestyle changes and eating nutritiously and exercising and sleeping and whatnot. However, in this case, for myself and when I talk to other people, I make an exception because it's an issue at such a genetic level. You could actually purchase products where they have the already methylated forms of things like B9 and B12 and D3 and so forth. And this takes pressure off of your MTHFR enzyme and the chemical pathway that it uses to produce methylated vitamins. Now, what supplements are we talking about here? So again, I'm not big into supplements, and you always want to look at getting as much dietary folate as possible. Juicing really helps. I recommend juicing on a semi-regular basis, especially if you haven't been through a cleanse yet. But there is one supplement that I do recommend, and what that is the Neuroimmune Stabilizer Cream. And that's put out by a company called Neurobiologics. And what it is, it's a cream because they're bypassing the entire digestive tract. Because like you've been learning as you've been watching these presentations, a lot of autoimmune patients have damaged, impaired digestion. And so it's a cream that you put on topically, and what you do, it comes in a little bottle, you just put a line of it on and you just rub it in somewhere like on your forearms where the skin is really thin. It absorbs in about 20 minutes and it's already have the methylated forms of your Bs in there. And that's going to help make up the lack for your slow MTHFR enzyme. And so we talk more about this in our ebook, How I Reversed My Autoimmune Disease. And if you're interested, we actually have a link to get this cream on our website if you're thinking in that direction. So really there's a lot of ins and outs to supplementing with this MTHFR gene mutation. Like how do you know if you need methylcobalamin or acetylcobalamin? Some people actually react pretty bad. They have bad reactions when they start taking methylated vitamins. And there's reasons for that. There's reasons why. And so you want to be understandable to that. And there's also reasons, many reasons as a matter of fact, why B12 supplementation could not be effective at all. We discussed that in the ebook, and so you could go take a look at it. Take a look at that there. That's on the website. So, but I do want to share a little testimony about this cream. I had, as I've mentioned in previous presentations, I had a really bad fungal skin infection that crept in through my dealings with my autoimmune disease. And I had it for 7 years, total, from when we started dealing with it to when we finally eliminated it, 7 years. I tried so many things. My wife and I literally spent years being pretty consistent in terms of researching and trying new things. Nothing would stop its progress. It would just kind of put the pause button on it. And as soon as I was done with whatever therapy or different herbal supplement we were trying, it would just pick right up where it left off, and it just kept growing and growing and growing. At one point, it covered a third of my body, from a little bit above my knees to a little bit above my belly button. Just that entire area, virtually 100%. And I found out about this gene mutation from a friend of ours, and as I looked into it, I saw I had a lot of the symptoms of those who struggle with this gene mutation. And I was so convinced that I skipped the testing process and I went straight for the protocol. I just ordered the cream. And within 1.5 weeks of taking this cream, my skin cleared up about 90%. About 90% just cleared right up. And we'd actually already had beaten it back quite a bit through natural methods, and this just took it away almost entirely. And then there was a last 10% that it took us about another 2 years to finally get the upper hand on. But praise the Lord, it's cleared up, and I'm out of the woods on that one. So why did this work? Why did I see this improvement? This is my theory why I think it worked. So methylation is needed to improve, as we discussed, glutathione, which is your body's primo detoxing agent. And it also boosts the immune system and helps the liver remove toxins. If you have low glutathione, you have an impaired ability to detox. And I feel like for this infection, it was so tenacious that my body needed all hands on deck to essentially be able to fully get rid of this thing. And because of this gene mutation, I just didn't have all the hands on deck. So anyhow, that's my own personal testimony about it. It's a good product. And again, I just want to say it's not a replacement for the 8 laws of health, and it's not a replacement for getting a lot of good dietary folate in your diet. So now I want to move on to our last 2 gene mutations, and this is the COMT and MAO gene mutations. And so these are 2 genetic mutations that are also really commonly found with people who have autoimmune diseases. Now, these 2 genes provide instructions for making enzymes that do some really important things in our bodies. Generally speaking, these enzymes break down neurotransmitters, things like dopamine, adrenaline, noradrenaline, and serotonin. And you see, the body likes balance. The body loves balance. And it doesn't like too many of these neurotransmitters, or it doesn't like too little of these neurotransmitters. It's like Goldilocks, right? Not too hot, not too cold, just right. That's how the body is. And these neurotransmitters, once they've run their course, the body breaks them down and it removes them, because if they hang around, they can build up, they can get too toxic, they change their function, and they can be really harmful to the brain actually as well. And unlike the MTHFR enzyme, with these two enzymes, with these 2 gene mutations, it could either decrease gene function, which slows down the breakdown of neurotransmitters, which means you'll have too much of them in the body, or it will increase the gene function, which speeds up the breakdown of neurotransmitters, which will mean you have too little neurotransmitters available in your body. So the gene could be either sped up too fast or going too slow. So what are the symptoms? Well, symptoms of having symptoms of having too much neurotransmitters can be pretty bad. Let's look at them. For instance, too much adrenaline. If you have too much adrenaline in your body, you could have insomnia, you could have chronic pain, you could have high blood pressure, you could have heart arrhythmias, excess sweating, tingling or numbness, poor circulation, digestion problems, mood issues, and low thyroid. That's too much adrenaline. For instance, if you have too much dopamine, this is what you have to deal with. You could have anxiety, chronic pain, worry, feeling burnt out all the time, delirium, tachycardia, high blood pressure, insomnia, paranoia, schizophrenia, and psychosis. Now, as you look at this list, you could see how a lot of these symptoms, they could be a lot of other things too, right? They could be associated with a host of other diseases. But since these gene mutations are so common, we shouldn't rule it out either, that if you're experiencing these issues, that it could be associated to these gene mutations. So that was too much. What if we have too little neurotransmitters? What takes place then? If you have, for instance, too little adrenaline, you could have fatigue, you could have weight gain, you could have restlessness and anxiety. Or if you have too much dopamine, you could have cravings, you could have substance abuse, addictions are very common, anger, impulsive nature, having, being really impulsive, and high-risk behavior. That's too little dopamine. So how do you know if you have it? How do you know if you have the COMT or the MAO gene mutation? Well, if you have any of these symptoms, that's definitely a possible indicator. Even though they're quite general, it's still not something to rule out. As a matter of fact, the COMT gene mutation is actually quite common. Research found that 80% of the population has a variation of this gene mutation. That's a lot, 80%. These symptoms that we're talking about, they could be an indicator of one of these two gene mutations. Also, if you have an autoimmune disease, these gene mutations and autoimmune patients really go hand in hand. So if you have an autoimmune disease, could be you have this gene mutation as well. MTHFR issues, if you have those, it's not uncommon for people that have MTHFR to have one of these other ones as well. Also, really the only way to know 100% is to get a genetic test. That's the only way to know for sure. And you could get it done at the same company that sells that methylation cream I was telling you about, Neurobiologics. They have the ability to do that. We have links to do that on our website, reverseautoimmune.com. Well, so what do you do if you have these two SNPs? What do you do if you have them? So what I keep seeing in the research is that in many cases, people with these genetic issues, with these two SNPs, it can be tolerable if the rest of your body is in really good working order. So here's a list of things you could do to help the COMT or the MAO gene mutation. Number one, you want to calm down the overall inflammation in your body. So here's a list of things that you could do to address the COMT or MAO gene mutation. Number one, calm down the inflammation in your body. You want to calm down the overall inflammation you have in your system. That's going to help with these gene mutations. Number two, if you have MTHFR, take care of that first. Taking care of that will also help offset some of the issues that you could be having with the COMT or MAO mutation. Also, help clear up nutritional deficiencies, which if you deal with your MTHFR mutation, it's going to help clear up some of your nutritional deficiencies. So you want to be making sure every day you're getting a lot of good quality plant-based foods. A lot of good, organic, rich in nutrient, plant-based foods. So my wife and I, we shoot for about 50% raw every day, and you could easily do that if you have a lot of fruit for breakfast, you have a big salad before lunch, and in the evening, maybe you have a smoothie of some kind. You're easily getting 50% raw food in your diet, and so that's a recommendation. Also, you want to heal your leaky gut. That is essential. If your gut is still damaged, you're not going to be able to really deal with these things at a genetic level. Also, you want to calm down your autoimmune disease. And that means you want to avoid eating the trigger foods or avoid being in the environments or exposing yourself to the toxins that are inducing your autoimmunity. That's going to help with these as well. And just watch foods that make you feel bad. So, I mean, if you're eating something random, if you eat blueberries and they make you feel bad, just step away for a little bit. Now, if everything makes you feel bad, you have a really leaky gut and you need to address that. So besides this, there are some natural supplements that may help. Now, before you start taking them, make sure you do everything that I just mentioned before. That's top priority. People make the mistake all the time of going to these herbs and supplements, and it's like, oh, I don't know, it's like pulling one little leaf off of a tree versus going at the root. You know what I mean? So you want to go at the root, and that's the laws of health and the list I just mentioned. But nonetheless, here's some herbal supplements that can help. If you have a slow COMT or a slow MAO, that means you have too many neurotransmitters. Vitamin B2 is good. Also, a root called Indian snake root is really good. There's several other names for that. But watch out for that one. That one's also considered a calcium blocker, so make sure your calcium levels are good. And progesterone. Progesterone is good. So these have been shown to stimulate the MAO gene, causing it to break down and remove more neurotransmitters. So that would be good if you have too many of them in your body. Now, if you have a fast COMT MAO gene, that means you have too little neurotransmitters. The following are known to inhibit COMT or MAO gene activity, and thus slow down the gene that's going too fast, resulting in too little neurotransmitters. St. John's wort, that has been known to do some pretty good things for those who suffer with depression. And if you have too little neurotransmitters, depression is going to be possibly an issue. Then rhodiola, that's another one. That one can produce some side effects, possible irritability and insomnia, so it's not really ideal, and it's really not a good mix with antidepressant drugs. But I figured that one was worth at least throwing out there. And then quercetin. There's a lot of plant sources of quercetin, like onions, for example. And so also, this is important, the MAO gene mutation also plays an important role in the breaking down of something called tyramine. Now, tyramine is found, I'll tell you where it's found, but if you can't break it down, if there's too much of it, something bad could happen. So if you have a fast MAO gene, that means you have too little neurotransmitters, because it's breaking down neurotransmitters, and it's not leaving you with enough, then you will not process tyramine very fast. And excess tyramine is not good. So what happens is your adrenal glands will respond to excess tyramine in your body. They'll send in neurotransmitters like dopamine, adrenaline, noradrenaline into the bloodstream. This sudden surge can cause life-threatening blood pressure spikes. So if you think you have these gene mutations, you really want to avoid the following foods. These foods are high in tyramine. They're typically fermented foods, cured foods, overripe foods, aged foods, or spoiled foods. So they fit into these categories. And here are the specific foods. Aged or strong cheeses. We're talking cheddar, blue cheese, gorgonzola, really strong, sharp cheeses. Cured or smoked meats, such as fish, sausage, or salami. Beers, it's aged, right? Some overripe fruits. Soy products like miso soup, bean curd, or tofu could be problematic. Certain beans even, like fava beans or broad beans. And certain sauces or gravies like soy sauce, teriyaki sauce, or bouillon-based sauces, those could be an issue. Pickled products like sauerkraut, sourdough breads. Do you see the common factor with all these? They're really aged things. These have high tyramine, and they really aren't good for people that have a fast MAO gene. Other foods, we've got a little bit, avocados, anchovies, raspberries, wines. I wouldn't worry about the avocado and raspberries as much, but these have mild amounts of tyramine. But most of these foods that I just mentioned, they're not good for you anyways, so they really would be good just to cut out completely. In my opinion, I just think they should be eliminated regardless. But especially if you have a fast MAO gene, which if you get a genetic test, you'll be able to see if you have a fast one or a slow one. So some of these genetic cases can be complicated. In that case, I really recommend finding a good and natural-minded doc that's well-versed in these things to help work you through these problems. You could also look on YouTube, type in MTHFR Mutation, and you can find a bunch of docs that are quite knowledgeable in this. Anyhow, I hope this information has been helpful, and my prayer is that you will be blessed in your pursuit of health. God bless you.